Silence, when utilised correctly, can be one of the loudest tools in storytelling. It can convey emotion, tension, and meaning in ways that words sometimes fail to capture. In AZRAEL, silence is the foundation of the film's world, not just a stylistic choice. Set in a post-apocalyptic landscape shaped by the fallout of the Rapture, it tells the story without speaking a single word. Dialogue is a passage that many horror movies recently have played with the idea of limiting. Combining this decision to be completely dialogue-free with the visuals and sound design draws attention to every moment, every sound, and every exchange of uneasy silence. The performance from Samara Weaving in this is exactly what you'd expect from someone who's gained such a comfortable space within the horror genre. The weight of the storytelling falls entirely on her shoulders and she excels with it. Without words, she's able to convey everything through expressions and physicality. Her fear, given her situation, is justifiably obvious, but then so is that determination that the character has. Whether it's in the way that her eyes will dart to unseen threats, or the small defiant movements she makes in the face of the cult's oppressive rules, every action feels intentional and loaded with meaning. Even in those moments of still, there's a simmering intensity to her presence, as though every breath she takes is a methodically planned act of survival. Her interactions with other characters are just as compelling too. The absence of language strips the relationships to their rawest forms, relying on gestures, eye contact, and actions to communicate. In the few moments we see AZRAEL connect with another person, it feels a lot more intimate with that enforced silence. Words aren't needed to show trust, fear, or betrayal in this world because the unspoken carries so much more weight. Now, this is one of AZRAEL's most striking features, and it's one of the main reasons why I enjoyed it so much. With narrative justification given for the decision to forsake dialogue, that being that the focus is on a cult who believes the act of speech is a sin, it allows the filmmakers to rely on visual and auditory storytelling in order to guide the audience through the narrative. Silence could have very easily become a flaw in this movie, but it never feels like something is absent here. Instead, it becomes what is absolutely the most defining characteristic of the film, shaping every single frame and scene. Samara Weaving aside, because let's face it, that woman could carry any movie on her back, the cinematography is what does a lot of the heavy lifting here, immersing us into this bleak landscape. Wide, expansive shots of the environment remind us of how empty this world has become, as if the essence of humanity itself has been erased. These moments allow silence to sink in like an oppressive shadow, but when the danger closes in, the camera shifts to these tight, suffocating angles that place us uncomfortably close to AZRAEL's growing fear and desperation. That very contrast between vastness and claustrophobia mirrors her precarious existence, caught somewhere between escape and entrapment. Lighting also enforces the tone of the film, painting this world that feels haunting and yet strangely beautiful at the same time. Darkness is more or less a constant, with flickers of firelight or muted glimmers of daylight giving brief breaks from the oppressive gloom. A dimly lit scene where shadows can stretch ominously across the screen signals the lurking danger within, while brighter moments feel less intense, giving AZRAEL time to breathe. But if the visuals are what anchor us in this world, it's the sound design that really helps it come to life. Silence may be present, but that doesn't mean the film is ever quiet. It's filled with this undeniable tension where every small sound is amplified to the point of dread. The crunching of leaves on the forest floor, that faint rustle of wind pushing through the trees, or the far-off growl of the film's creatures become as significant as any line of dialogue would be in a traditional story. Audiences become hyper-aware of what may be coming next. The score, used sparingly, punctuates the soundscape with a deep, unsettling tone that creeps in like the beginnings of a storm. It's less of a traditional soundtrack and more of an emotional undercurrent, amplifying the intensifying isolation and the ever-present danger. The quiet forces us to engage on a deeper level. Viewers are left to interpretate the subtleties of the performance and the visual cues. This then heightens the film's themes, emphasising the loss of voice as a metaphor for control. The cult's enforced silence becomes this symbol of their domination over individuality. Silence is the foundation of the film's entire moral and thematic framework. The cult at the centre of it all views speech as sinful, believing that so deeply that it leads to the removal of vocal cords for those who stray from the unwritten rules. This mechanism of control enforces silence, suppressing individuality, freedom, and even the most basic forms of self-expression. Words carry power, they can question an oppressive authority, ignite a rebellion, and more. AZRAEL uses this ideology to question the act of communication and the role it plays in society. For this cult, the vow they take is framed as purification, an unnatural path to salvation in the wake of the rapture, but for those who don't conform to those beliefs, it's more of a form of imprisonment, erasing one's agency. Without words, the oppressed are left without a means to resist or articulate the degree to which they suffer. In this movie, AZRAEL's survival hinges on her ability to navigate this new world where silence becomes a burden in both a literal and a metaphorical sense. To speak is to invoke death, whether that be at the hands of the cult or the monstrosities that now inhabit this world. This distinction can be crucial because it reframes the silence as resilience. It becomes a way of survival, a way of persevering in a world that seeks to strip her of her life. The tension between imposed and chosen silence is one of the most powerful elements of the film. It considers the emotional and moral cost of silence, particularly when it's wielded as a form of punishment or control. AZRAEL's use of symbolism further deepens those questions. She herself is a figure caught between silence and expression. Her name evokes the Angel of Death, a figure that is primarily associated with transition and judgment. That connection suggests that her journey isn't just about escape, it's about defining what it means to live in a world where silence has been weaponized. Her determination is a reminder that even in silence there's strength, and without words, a story can still be told. The exploration of sin and silence confronts some of the more interesting questions about communication and control. In a world where speaking is forbidden, AZRAEL is this haunting meditation on the power of silence, not just as a narrative device, but as a force that shapes agency. The world of AZRAEL is shaped by the aftermath of the Rapture, a religious event that left humanity grappling with a sense of abandonment. In the absence of divine clarity, societal structures collapse and new ideologies emerge from that. The cult in the film exemplifies this descent into extremism. Fear becomes a guiding principle, fear of sin, of judgment, and the burned ones. This fear manifests itself in authoritarian rules that strip individuals of their voices both literally and figuratively. By presenting this society that enforces silence as a moral imperative, the film explores how survival in this type of situation can often lead to the formation of such extremist groups. They offer a sense of order and purpose in a seemingly damned world at the cost of both freedom and humanity. This theme of societal control invites comparisons to other films that use a similar narrative device. A Quiet Place, for example. This also builds tension around the silence, but the real focus is on those external threats, the alien creatures that hunt by sound. In contrast, AZRAEL looks inwards, examining how silence is imposed as a means of submission. While both of these movies are each excellent in their own way, they aren't direct comparisons, because where one uses their silence as a survival mechanism against a tangible enemy, the other uses it to explore the intangible enemy that is fear, control, and indoctrination. The Silence is another one. It's admittedly a terrible film, but it presents the world overrun by monsters too. But that story leans more into survival horror rather than the thematic depth found in AZRAEL. What sets this apart is the focus on silence being used as a metaphor for the suppression of individuality and free will. The heart of that being AZRAEL herself, a character who embodies the idea of resistance against surroundings that seek to silence her. Her journey from a member of the cult to a defiant survivor who fights for her autonomy is deeply personal, driven by relationship and her refusal to accept the vision of righteousness that was being presented. And yet even with that, her instincts don't necessarily come without their moral challenges. In a world where silence is equated with purity, every sound feels like an act of rebellion. Her journey through the film forces her not just to face external threats, but the internal conflict of choosing between self-preservation and the risk of breaking free from the cult's restraints. AZRAEL's character could be looked at as a study in contrasts. On the surface, she's a silent protagonist in an already silent world, but her actions speak volumes. Every decision she makes throughout the film goes to question the oppressive authority that she was raised within. Her name evoking the Angel of Death adds another intentional layer of symbolism to her character, and like the angel, she becomes a harbinger of change. AZRAEL throws us into a world where silence is both a weapon and a shield, unraveling a story of survival, rebellion, and the fragility of human connection. The dialogue-absent story forces us to confront the weight of what is left unspoken, amplifying the tension and emotion at every single turn. Her journey is a defiance against a world that seeks to erase her. Every step she takes and the risks she endures speaks louder than her words ever could. It shows that while silence may be imposed by an impressive force, it can never truly silence the will to resist.